Good afternoon, everyone, if you're in the Eastern time zone. And I'm going to give a talk today, as you can see by this topic, on artificial intelligence as it relates to integrity, ethics, geopolitics, and socioeconomic impacts. I've been broadened it to be more than just social, to include economics here. Let me begin by giving you an outline of what I wish to talk about. And clearly, I want to focus on what is the difference in the relationship between integrity and ethics, and then to talk about this disruption that we keep hearing about, and I'll call it the coming wave of change. And embedded in that will be the role of AI as it affects geopolitics in a broadest sense of governance, and that can be governance of the nation state down to governance of the corporation, for example. The winners and losers in this AI gold rush, I'll summarize those in the form of 3 categories. And we'll look at these socioeconomic impacts, followed by how to constrain AI while encouraging and supporting innovation. And this ends with a question mark, and where is it all going? So that's what I'd like to cover. And I'd like to begin by showing that opening remarks is that I will be examining AI through beyond technology. In other words, I will focus on these issues that are more of social nature, integrity, ethics, and geopolitics and social responsibility. I believe, to start with, no matter what I say on the negative side, because I'm going to be focusing on the nefarious use of AI, I do believe that if we get control now, sooner than later, on how to manage AI, that it poses unparalleled opportunity for the world. However, society will be the biggest loser if the regulations in the near term, and the near term is the next 2 or 3, 5 years, somewhere in that space. And, it's given that, people build these systems, and we can't expect that we can expect either omission as well as intent. Some models will have backdoors, and they could go rogue. This has been already demonstrated with a variety of systems by making them by planting things into them to make them go rogue, and they do. So we know that can happen. So another key question that's going to be at the end of trying to answer all of what we're dealing with here is when these models do not behave as the user intended, or is deceived in achieving the intent the user has, who's responsible? And how do you enforce responsibility? I mean, is it the user? Is it the developer? Is it the communications supplier? I mean, it's all these kinds of issues have come up already in the world of the internet, but now are becoming more complicated because of the social implications and dimensions. So, in setting the stage, that's just what I was saying about the significant boon to the world economy. But this, however, down here on the 3rd bullet is the key thing, and this is where I will spend most of my time dealing with the howevers. And this is a disruptive technology in both the technical terms as well as in its social contexts. And in addition to being disruptive like that, it's also dual use in it strictly as in it can be used for good or it can be used for nefarious purposes. And the discrimination is not in how you throw a switch, it's how you make use of it. Mostly black box solutions by design. In other words, the systems can't explain themselves, which is unusual for most software code. But in this case, black box solutions are, in effect, what exactly it means. You can put an input in, something happens in the process, you get an output, and you either rationalize the output, makes sense, or it doesn't. And you can't ask it, the box inside, how it got to that solution. So this is black box, and that's something I'll talk about because we also have the idea of explainable AI. And I'll get into that in a few minutes. The other thing that's really critical is that now that these large language models, which have been out for about 18, 20 months, are out in the wild, they're also basically unconstrained in that these have been tested to some degree in the lab by the company that makes them. Even in some cases, third parties have tested aspects of their algorithms. But they're basically unconstrained because there's currently no laws in effect anywhere in the world that deal with regulation. There's guidelines. Guidelines are voluntary. So, we see that what is happening now with AI in this early formative stage of its early commercialization, yet again, because AI has gone through springs, winters in the past. But what is happening is that AI is starting to drive geopolitics, organizational change, transformation of work, and of course, it's feeding social media type silos. And I would argue that this technology can now manipulate the human mind at the level of the individual like no other technology before. Yes, we've had propaganda that comes with radio, with newsprint, and with television and so on. But this is not mass manipulation in the sense of that. This is individual manipulation. So we've already seen social media fragmenting society to a significant degree, just in terms of interests, if you like. I think AI is going to be far more disruptive when it comes to how it could affect the human mind. So that's the setting of the stage. So here's what I believe to be the basics about this argument made in this presentation and other op-eds that Ellie Fahy and I have written, and I'll explain that at the end, on the subject of AI, and looking specifically through the lens of integrity and ethics. So what are they? Well, fundamentally, they're different in that they're human qualities, but integrity is an internalization of beliefs, such as being honest and fair. It's absolute, and it lies at the core of our human anima or psyche. In other words, example, if you're walking on the street and you see somebody fall off their bicycle, you will probably go to their aid, or at least ask if they need help, or give them help. That's part of your integrity. The ethics, we'll challenge that in a few minutes with a trolley car problem. And that will be an interesting discussion, particularly, I hope, when we get into the conversation part at the end of this. Integrity manifests itself, however, through ethical behavior. And ethical behavior is something that's cultural, and it's been set by rules and ideas that have evolved over long periods of time. And many of these are being threatened today by the rise of certain types of technology, such as AI and social media, without inducing AI in it, just the way it fragments society into silos. So ethics is an externalization shaped by the cultural environment. That's the bottom line here. Now, the link between integrity and ethics. Well, AI algorithms, all the data associated with their application, should be designed and trained to operate by people with integrity and operate in an ethical manner that respects things like human rights, privacy, and fairness. And these are essential in order to build trust and reliability towards AI. If we end up with, in the short term, with AI becoming incredibly disruptive in the negative sense, then people won't buy into this. It'll become pushback. It'll become the Luddites on a grand scale of the early days of the Industrial Revolution. So all publicly facing AI applications is a point I raised that should be explainable. In other words, white box solution as opposed to black box. And this is a technical issue. These black box solutions are, in fact, a consequence of the model's design. It's not a coding issue. We can't code around it. It's a fundamentals of the design of the models as they exist today. There's a lot of research underway to try and reduce this black box, the need to have to only be black box and to be more Bayesian in a sense, if you're familiar with statistics. White box solutions are primarily Bayesian statistics. So in most of the AI systems, of course, and we're talking about natural language processing, without going into a technical side of AI, I mean, we can think of AI as basically dealing with the human senses, including, of course, the brain that does the processing. So we have vision, we have language. These are the sensors that are most commonly used right now because these are the ones that deal with natural language processing and image processing, whether it's a still or animation or a video. So those things are the earliest to really be tested in terms of machine intelligence, in terms of linking to a human. And this publicly facing is absolutely critical, in my view, because if you have, say, a government who issues passports and it turns down people because they don't get their passport, well, you have to ask, well, why can't I have a passport? And the system can't tell you if it's a black box solution. And no bureaucrat can tell you other than to make up a story. So it's really important that these be explainable. because the laws and the rules and the integrity and the ethics of society are going to all evolve around how this stuff works, or how it could change how we work. And the other thing is that, as you all are aware of, I'm sure, is that mass quantities of data are required to train these types of models called large language models, LLMs. And much of this data is actually scraped from the internet without any permissions. They don't, even the people who scrape it don't ask for permission. And if they do ask and they're turned down, they still scrape it anyway. So, I mean, there's a huge legal issue developing in regard to the ownership and the rights related to information that's posted already on the surface internet. A surface internet is, there's basically two layers to the internet. The one that I would say we all use is the surface layer. There's another deep layer, or called the deep net, the dark net, the dark web, whatever term you wish. But this is where there's a lot of dark activity goes on, such as when you hear about steal social security numbers or things like that, they get posted for sale on the deep web, and there's a lot of very deep, unexplained activity goes on there that is, of course, of importance to our police services and our intelligence agencies, for example. So this vast quantity of data is causing yet another problem, and particularly a legal one. Oops, sorry. I have a very sensitive mouse here. AI-powered chatbots can be programmed to manipulate or deceive users. In addition, adversaries can inject misleading or distorted data into training processes to influence the behavior or outcomes of an AI model. So this leads to misleading or disinformation and misinformation. So here's the trolley car problem. So this is a long-standing problem and the introduction of light rail, if you like, trolley cars some years ago or a century ago. So this problem is cast now in the age of an AI-driven autonomous vehicle. Situation: the vehicle is going to either hit a child or an adult on a roadbed. The question: which one does it choose? There is no alternative. The answer, and I look you to each think about your answers to these two questions. In much of the Western world, the AI-driven autonomous vehicle would hit the child or the adult. The same question in the Eastern world: which one would it hit? I'll give you 30 seconds or less to tell me your answers. I'll give you the answers.
Adult and child.
I'm sure you probably all got it correctly, but just in case not, this is an important issue that I'm now going to focus on related to how AI, in terms of its ethics and integrity, and how it supports good practice, where is going to be a huge challenge. Because, as you can see, in the Western world, the choice would be by ethics to hit the adult. In the Eastern world, the choice would be to hit the child. Fundamentally different approach, each embedded in deep ethical understanding of why it would make that, why us in each part of this world would make those choices. AI doesn't know the difference. And so how do we build systems that can make this kind of differentiation? That's a posing question. I'm not going to answer it. I don't know the answer yet. But coming to the however here, and it's, again, not embedded in the models. It's about the people that build the models and the people that use the models. And all of those in the chain, those who certify, test, etc. But it's all about the people having the right qualities. And this is going to lead to arguments about the need for certification, the levels of certification, the levels of risk that these systems impose on society. And so we'll explore some of these because these are non-technical, although they're driven by a technical underpinning. So let's prioritize or think about a way to prioritize integrity. So integrity is not prioritized in AI development deployment. I would argue it could lead to social harm, social harms, in fact, more than one. It could have disproportionate effects on maligned communities, marginalized communities, which are already experiencing things like discrimination due to facial recognition, which is one of the image things of AI. And that's linked to people and linked to natural language and their names and so forth. It can reinforce existing disparities and exacerbate social inequalities, of which I just was linking these two things together. And it can lead to social as well as whole suffering. Lead to a society as a whole suffering malicious consequences due to abuses created by AI. And GAI, which is the form of natural language processing we're talking about today, generative artificial intelligence, their algorithms are used to develop, could be used to develop automated hacking tools that exploit all kinds of vulnerabilities that allow systems to be targeted and disrupted for a variety of purposes, mostly self-centered purposes, but sometimes state actors. So nation states get involved in the intelligence gathering activity. Now I'll switch to AI and geopolitics for a few minutes. And we have in this enormous potential to disrupt the current model of governance. AI has got an incredible potential, as you will see in some of the things I will raise in a few minutes. But things you're fairly familiar with already is things like discriminating fake news from real news, in the sense of even video and a script that goes with it. It's very hard to tell the difference if it's been created by a machine or created by a human. And the messaging, of course, would be quite different. And ever increasing echo chambers of social segmentation are being amplified by the use of AI. And election meddling, which we've heard about since, especially in the south of the border since 2016, more in 2020, and now we're talking about election meddling in Canada in public discourse. So this is happening, and that is a serious problem, and it's one that typically is coming from outside the nation that the election is taking place in. So that's a nation-state issue. And purposeful disruptions of critical infrastructure is another possibility. And a good example is one I'm sure you all remember a couple summers ago with colonial pipelines in the eastern United States got shut down by a hacking mechanism, a hacking attack for malware to seek funding for turning the systems back on. And that was a critical infrastructure, and people were without the gasoline for couple of weeks almost. And of course, AI is transforming warfare, and in particular, the most important area to watch for that transformation right now, in a tactical sense anyway, is actually the war in Ukraine. The use of commercially available hobbyist-type drones are now being built in Ukraine at the level of AI systems with vision that can track an individual driving through traffic on a motorcycle. And it still sticks onto that individual. It's quite impressive. And this is done by backroom boys in places like Kyiv. Meanwhile, with all this government interference and malfeasance starting to happen in the private sector, governments are pouring billions of dollars into national AI strategies. Canada was the first country in the world to actually announce a national AI strategy, and typically one place that many times smaller than Canada, but bigger in influence, is Singapore. And Singapore typically has the first one of these sort of strategies out, but we beat Singapore by 6 months. Big deal. Anyway, the fact that we have a strategy is certainly at least an important element. I was seconded in 1986 to the government of Canada to write first memorandum to cabinet on artificial intelligence. So I'm pleased to see we're at least moving the stakes a little bit in recent years. On the international scene, the closest we come to having regulation was recently passed in May of this year by the European parliamentary process. I say that because there's 3 levels of approval. And so it has reached the final level and it's now been declared ready to be implemented, and it goes into an effect in about 2 years' time. primarily the reason for the big gap is for both the policy people to organize at the national level across the European Union, as well as for companies to prepare for this nascent rules and regulations about AI. So seems like mouse is going to have to go forward 2 and back 1. So lessons from history. Well, we certainly have known from history various technologies that sparked all kinds of changes, whether it's from the earliest days of ancient civilizations to more modern times, such as the rise of the Industrial Revolution. And those machines dramatically changed our polities, our societies, our economics, our employment patterns, our demographics, and our cultures. And I believe that AI is likely to have at least as profound effect, if not more so, particularly on how it affects demographics, employment, and culture. So I won't review these, but I'll just present this for your scanning. These are obviously names you all know, and these are some statements that I've selected that they have made about AI. And I'll point out the one by Putin, because this is the one that is probably most widely misquoted. In the same paragraph that this sentence is taken from, he also said that AI is critical to the dominance of Russia in the world. Paraphrase it there. But he also said in that very same paragraph, artificial intelligence is the future, not only for Russia, but for all of humankind. And well, I have to agree, it's certainly a future for all of humankind, but if we don't do it right, it might be much more messy than we think. And you can see others have said various activities related to this. So it's on the lips of political leadership around the world, and very intensive competition is shaping up around 3 general axes. One is the European Union, one is around the United States, and one is around China. And let's hope that we can at least regulate to the point that we have common rules, because we've got a global kind of technology. There was a petition that was made several months ago, was last year, in which people who are prominent in AI were being encouraged to impose a 6-month moratorium. You may have heard about this. It made the media, public media. And I was opposed to this. I saw no purpose in a 6-month moratorium, because it can't even get regulations developed in 2 years. So 6 months is a silly thing. However, there was another, and it was signed by thousands of people. Another one, though, that was signed also around the same time was an open letter about the future of AI and its potential, which is what I'm going to talk about here today, and that is how it can be so disruptive. And that one argued that, in fact, if we didn't get a handle on this stuff, it could lead to the end of civilization. And I still hold to that view if we're seriously not able to get a challenge on this technology. So I'm going to present here a two-part story. I decided to use ChatGPT. This is version 3 when I chose this. Well, actually, some of this I think is from ChatGPT 4 with an O. It's not a 0, it's an O. And so any of the sentences that end with a period, whether they're in bold or in black text, these are answers unedited I got from ChatGPT. So I thought I'd ask ChatGPT some questions. So here's the first question. This is not the second. So ChatGPT, explain this in terms of technology. That was my first prompt. And you can see in blue the things I'm emphasizing here. And it's interesting. I gave a seminar in Western Canada. I see some folks probably heard that who are on board here today. On AI is on the rampage. Well, that was my word at the time, rampage. And I see that ChatGPT, in the context of the very question I asked, is also using the same word. And I thought that was a good word to describe something that we really have no idea what's going on, where it's going, and how it's going to get there, and when. So I've given you some time to scan that, but I also went on and asked it more. So is there more? Same prompt, but I just said, is there more? And this is what it tells me. And as you can see, it also makes you feel like you're a human. It says, yes, here are some additional points about the impact of disruption. And you can see all of these. They're all basically fundamental to the change that's shaping our world today. And you can see in summary, disruption is on a rampage. Again, that's its summary word. Driven by new technology and innovations that are changing the way that industries and businesses operate. Well, I would also say governments. I would add that. And I asked, is there still more? And you can see overall the impact is wide-ranging and complex. And it affects entire ecosystems. So because I mentioned that this is really about the social science side of AI, there's very little technical stuff here, or techie stuff. So let me just say what I've got here is that, first of all, what we're experiencing is these systems are at their most immature state of public release. They're only going to get better over time, if indeed we could constrain the breadth of how much badness can happen in the interim. But you know, the chatbots are now at the point where the written and spoken language appears as if we're composed by an intelligent, knowledgeable being. And it's done with statistics. It's quite amazing that we can do this. But when you've got billions of moving points and you can do it all in fractions of a second, you can make things look like it's the human making thought and making talk as a result of it. And maybe that's in fact how brains evolved over time biologically. They only work, of course, on these statistical correlations, which are based on training sets of billions of factoids. And as I said, mostly scraped from the internet with all its legal problems emerging. And large language models can simply make things up. And this is the term hallucination, which again is familiar to, I'm sure, all of you, is not a new term. It's not a media term, like to say that Geoffrey Hinton is the godfather of AI. That's a media term. He's not the godfather of AI. But hallucinations has been a word in AI research literature for a very long time, because the earliest systems hallucinated all the time almost. They hardly ever could even produce one coherent sentence. That was the early days, 25 years ago. But now it's takes thousands of times before it produces and doesn't produces any incoherent sentence. Anyway, massive changes have happened in the work of large language models. That's techie stuff here. So I asked GPT what are the technical implications of generative AI, and I won't go through the details. These are here for your edification if you wish to look at the slide deck later. But obviously, it's going to be things around computational resources. As you saw in our recent federal budget in February, that almost $800 million towards high-performance computing, primarily for computation resources for AI, and several hundred million as well for application stuff and helping companies. And that's the data side. So data requirements, massive amounts of data, and in fact, some are starting to see papers now that we're running out of data. And of course, they've scraped the internet. So where else can you get lots of digital data? Well, maybe it's going to be in people's personal computers. We don't watch out for the next wave of interception of our personal lives. Interoperability, ethics, and fairness. I mean, these are all kinds of issues that are now being woven into a technical argument that you need to deal with things like ethics and fairness. And of course, the argument that Ellie and I have been stressing is about integrity, because integrity is even more fundamental than ethics, as we, no matter where we are on the planet, we're born with our integrity. Manipulate AI algorithms. Well, that can be done in a variety of ways. So I simply identify here a few. And these are all based in, the blue, of course, is the main point, and the black text is a subsidiary or additional supporting material. And there's nothing here that I guess I probably haven't said. They're not designed, though, if they're not designed with integrity in mind, they can lead to unjust or discriminatory outputs and outcomes. Now, there's a new thing that's coming along. It's called AI agents. And the latest op-ed, in fact, which is attached here at the back with a biography, lists the latest AI agent paper that Ellie Fahy and I have done. It's published about 10 days ago. And it deals with the large language models are like a full encyclopedia, if you like. Think of a large language model, you name it, ChatGPT or Claude. They're like Encyclopedia Britannica. A AI agent is like an encyclopedia of a topic. So in other words, it's a narrower set than a large language model, but it's got far more detail about a specific application area. So this is where we will see, I believe, very significant improvements in productivity and efficiencies and new insights in professional services, be they accountants or lawyers, even in clinicians of various degrees, from internal medicine people to, surgeons and all other aspects of specialization. However, these narrower applications can also be misused. And so there's a concern about the negative side of AI agents. In fact, one of the issues we've raised in this latest op-ed is that these AI agents could, in fact, because as you know, you've become dependent on your mobile device. We call it a phone, but it's anything but. It's more than that. But you become dependent on this to the point that I believe we're going to start to see people becoming dependent on their AI advisor, their AI agent, their AI avatar, their AI partner, such that they won't question the answers. They'll just accept them. And therefore, in effect, not stress their cognitive abilities in making decisions. They'll defer to the machine. This may be very, very disruptive in the future. And we've got to make sure that people don't fall victim like that. How? I'm not sure yet. There's legal implications of using these models, and I've already hinted at that with respect to the scraping of the internet. That's this boil the ocean approach of taking up everything you can get. But who bears responsibility for these problems, and who is responsible to ensure ethical uses of these models? Is it the companies? Is it some kind of a regulator that would have to approve or give a license, and you only deal with issues when they arise? I mean, the complexity is vast and it's uncharted territory. The only comparisons that have made any modest implication that I'm aware of to what we're trying to deal with here with regard to artificial intelligence and its regulation has been with nuclear weapons and nuclear power. There was a spin-off from that, and in bioethics, and in particular the development of biotoxins and bioweapons. So that's where the science, engineering, and social things come together. And this AI activity of the current cycle is certainly focusing our sharp attention on the ethical fundamental uses of this technology for the benefit of society. So there are several categories of winners. However, I would argue there's really only three at this stage on a grand scale. And the biggest winners today are clearly the platform operators and providers, the people who made these tools. And they are arguably doing some testing of their algorithms, both internally and blue team type activities, as well as some of them seek outside third-party assessment of their algorithms. And these companies continue to grow at an enormous pace, and they're growing through strategic and tactical partnerships of all sorts. The next biggest winners are likely to be, and are starting to show that fact, early business and individual adopters. These could include business users such as accountants, lawyers, and medical people, as I mentioned. Also, though, business and policy analysts, as well as others such as writers, researchers, educators, and students. In fact, the latter two, the educators and the students, has been thrown into complete chaos as a result of these large language models, because now a student can ask their question to the large language model, get an answer that's probably pretty good, and either just copy it or do a little editing and make it look like they did a bit of text to it. But nonetheless, it's not judging the independent knowledge or thinking processes and rational skills of the student because they're just copying. So there's a huge implication to what's the role of the educational process going forward. It's certainly on its head right now. AI-driven losers. Well, today, the suppliers, as I was saying, they appear to be operating with integrity and ethical approaches, although I must say, some of these firms, especially on the social media side and their social media operations, have been drastically cutting their ethics teams that formally and previously edited and took down offensive postings based on their policies about what was allowed to be said. So there's been retrenchment in some aspects there. And there's also, of course, serious concerns that have been raised by politicians, think tanks, and others, even unions, about job security. And it's rather interesting to look back on the strike in California, or specifically the writers and actors in the United States last summer, as that was an example of a professional, union that was very au fait with what is coming technologically. And they were one of the fundamental reasons that strike was in play was because both actors and writers felt that their future would be, as professionals, would be threatened by these large language models and animation tools that can turn text into good scripts and create the actors, even with the voices of the real people, even though it's not the real people doing the speaking. It's trained on their phonetics. So this was interesting, and it got resolved to the satisfaction of both sides, given the state of that technology at the time. So I'm sure it'll be interesting to see in 5 years what's the status of this agreement. So that was a security issue on summer jobs. Given the potential harm that GAI, I should say, can rain on society, there is a wide range of threats with impacts that vary from the individual to society as a whole. And it's important to realize currently that the winners and losers are not fixed or predetermined. Positive and negative impacts can vary based on a whole range of actions and decisions taken by stakeholders. And this can be across all kinds of sectors. And individuals who lack awareness or understanding of the risks associated with GAI may be at a disadvantage. And we'll only be able to measure that as we see more and more as data and statistics are collected as to who is reporting that they're being infected or affected at the local level, i.e. their device has been compromised. So let's turn now to socioeconomic impacts of AGI. And so I asked ChatGPT a few more questions to begin this session. And what are the social implications of generative AI? And you can see that these are summarizing some of the things I've already mentioned. For example, job displacement, privacy, security, intellectual property concerns, bias and discrimination, accountability. And it's important for society to consider the potential implications of this technology, as it can have negative effects, not just positive benefits. I see there's a hand raised. Is that for an intervention or a comment or question for the?
There'll be a question at the end, Peter. It's okay.
Okay, thank you. So with that in mind, I'll turn to the next question I asked ChatGPT on this scale. And what are the economic implications of generative AI? And again, it summarizes, and you're probably familiar with this layout. This is a standard format of a ChatGPT response, although I color-coded it. That's the only difference. And you can see it even raises issues about cost of development. And in terms of cost of development, we're now at the stage where we're talking about actually hundreds of billions of dollars to build a data center. And there's planning underway to build trillion-dollar data centers. Amazon is currently building a new data center right next door to a nuclear power plant. And the reason they've chosen that is so they can get electricity from the nuclear power plant. So there's a huge, massive hardware advancement going on. Hardware, in fact, there's some significant advancements in hardware going on. I mean, we've got the TensorFlow chip now, which comes from Google, which can outperform in many of its characteristics the NVIDIA chips. And the NVIDIA chips are far more energy intensive than the TensorFlow chip. So there's all kinds of advancements at the materials level, systems integration pieces to lead to, you know, trillion-dollar data centers in the next 10 years or less. It's also creating new business models of various sorts in terms of an economic impact. We've seen the rise of influencers on the internet. That's a kind of business model of a sort. AI is going to improve that and maybe even become even more massive than any personal influencer we've seen on the internet. I'm trying to change slides here. The biggest concerns about the rise of AI, well, I would say it's AI. The biggest concerns about the rise of AI are the emergence of AI-enabled applications have the potential for societal disruption. And AI agents is an example I was just talking about. Concern is about nefarious uses of GAI. I mean, that's my prime concern. I see the big issue is positive. You know, it's going to be very big positive stuff. However, if the negative hits the world, and most people today have two preconceived notions about AI and about nuclear things, and both of them are brought to us by Hollywood. If it's anything to do with nuclear, it's a disaster. If it's anything to do with AI, it's the terror of the future and the super smart machine. So that's what people think about when they hear nuclear power or they hear about artificial intelligence. That is going to be a huge mindset to change, although it's already at the extremes of what the nefarious could do. Just food for thought, maybe for discussion at the end of this presentation. So anyway, this online behavior can lead to erosion of trust and credibility if it's done as I've been describing, or even worse. And that will lead to all kinds of breakup in our trust of institutions. I mean, we're constantly hearing these days about, you know, the modern kind of new rise of the populist and the lack of trust in our institutions. I mean, this is dangerous stuff to be mouthing off at without giving it deep thought. And that's why I say mouthing off at, because these institutions have been created over centuries, some of them because of wars, many of them because of wars, in fact, which have all been disruptive and not beneficial to many. So I am of the view that this is a rising concern is you know, social trust in global social trust in AI systems. Otherwise, they'll go underground. And if we ban them, that'll make it even worse. So is AI, in effect, an existential risk? Well, there is a movement. It's been around for some time. I would suggest that one of the prominent people in this is a professor at University of Oxford. They've come up with a concept called the X risk concerns, which is where a powerful AI model attains unbounded power through self-replication and self-improvement. And this is kind of a logical extension of what we're seeing today with LLMs. But there are scaling, I'm sure, issues associated with this. But nonetheless, it's still something to think about, certainly before we get there, because we don't want to have this arising and then we forgot to think about this, or we ever even thought about thinking about this. I mean, one of the issues a lot about this AI stuff is that famous Rumsfeld quote of "we don't know what we don't know." And there's a lot we don't know about what we're talking about here, what I'm talking about here. But I'm trying to lay out what we don't know, at least in a framework, so that we can start to drill deeper or replace this with something better. And this uncontrolled growth in AI power could also foster technology giants beyond the scale that we see today. And already, as you'll see in a later slide, the role of the corporation as in its executive leadership, to take it as the CEO. There's also the chairman. Sometimes it's the same person, but not always. And best it isn't always, in my view. But nonetheless, the executives of corporations that control these large enterprises that are now becoming governments becoming socially dependable. It's going to create a new class of discussion we'll get to when we talk about governance in a few minutes. However, we got to remember that what's good for a private company isn't necessarily best for society. So this is another collision that's about to, I think, form. I mean, we've already all experienced the COPE process related to the climate change debate, and how that is nation states discussing with nation states. Yes, the fossil fuel industry is there in the tune of the largest delegations of all, but they are only advising. They're not making the decisions. And cities, which of course is where most of the greenhouse gases emerge from, are not even at the table because it's the nation states that are at the table. So I think we're going to see the high table of society starting to change in the coming few years, and it'll be driven by a number of things: climate change, AI, perhaps the state of war in the world or state of governance of the world. All are going to have a play in this. So this is my take on that subject. So there's also, of course, the rise of AI in terms of its impact on jobs, and it's going to affect all kinds of jobs, not the classic jobs that we think about as retail, warehouse, stocking shelves, things like that. Those are already taken care of. That's easy to do. It's going to be in the deep thinking kind of jobs, or jobs where a high level of skill is required that takes years of perfection to develop. So workforce displacement and job insecurity is a serious concern. And I think it's a whole of society kind of issue that needs to be debated, and that it should be debated in the context of what the country is trying to do as an enterprise, and how it's planning to accommodate its people going forward. Because these are going to not only displace many jobs, it's going to create new jobs. What kind of new jobs? We've got to prepare for that. And the rate of displacement is going to be staggering once it starts to roll, because one robot already can replace about 6 people on an assembly line. And so if you have a brand new robot and a new type of assembly process arrangement, you can replace all your 95% of your staff overnight. So this is a huge issue that's going to require local and regional, national, and probably international cooperation to get a handle on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's think about humans versus rogue AI. I've mentioned this as a possibility, and I see that, certainly if we look at history, it's been fairly linear in the sense that we've managed to always avoid the worst of everything, because every even war ends with a treaty of some sort, or most do, or if it's not a treaty, it's at least an armistice. Since the Korean War ended more than half a century ago, it's still an armistice. It's not a treaty. There's no peace treaty. But nonetheless, hasn't been conflict there since the hot war, although threats have been emerging, as you all know, in the last decade or so. So we've always been able to resolve these things through treaties and other negotiated approaches. But rogue AI models will have a focus on achieving self-directed goals that could add a radically new dimension to reality. I've been creating a multi-layered chess game. It's like creating a multi-layered chess game that maybe beyond human acumen is actually solved, at least in some respectable period of time. I mean, this is one of the reasons we're starting to hear arguments about autonomous weapons, and AI-driven autonomous weapons in particular, making human-like decisions, because the time frame between detect, fire, and destroy is getting so close that it's so short that humans can't make those sorts of decisions in a timely way. There isn't time to do it. So that's another big issue as we see the rise of autonomous weapons. Now, guardrails, as I mentioned, these are voluntary, and yes, companies and countries are starting to impose or at least ask for guardrails. Canada did so a year ago. proposed some guardrails as guidelines to the private sector, but we're still far from regulation. And as I said, the only place that there's any regulation right now is actually in the European Union. So all of this leads to a tall order riff with a lot of unknowns. And one of the problems now with these models out there, whether they're nefarious or otherwise, is that you can't pull the plug on them like you could on plugging a computer, because these things are on, billions of these things now. I mean, everywhere in the world, you have the power inside one of these tools to access the cloud, accessing these large language models. So when there are non-state actors, I mean, there's only less than 200 states, and there's billions of mobile phones. How many of those billions are all trustworthy? I mean, there's going to be a lot of nefarious playing going on in this. You'll remember, I'm sure, when the internet came along in the mid-90s, one of the big things to do by the high school dropouts or the smart kids in the basement was to go to websites and say Kilroy was here, or things like that. Well, we're going to have a lot more very disruptive kinds of things coming with large language models, I view, and they will be launched from things like this. So how do we constrain what I was just saying while encouraging and supporting innovation? In fact, in the European Union's Act that was recently passed, 3 countries actually opposed it at the level when it was at its already got its 2nd level of approval. But before it went to the 3rd level, these 3 countries, won't name them at the moment, got involved in slowing down some of the conditions for large language model development. In other words, not to make it so dramatic as they build in a plan, but it had to be such and such by a certain time, because they were concerned it would hinder innovation. So the 3 countries did get their way, and they got a longer time frame. But that's about innovation. So how can AI, I can't read my title because there's something over top of it. But we can address the direct impact of AI on automation, or with automation, because we see that it's existing jobs that are getting displaced. So we know what's coming, we know it's being displaced to do, and so there's the need to help, retrain and program various people's skills. And in fact, this is also raising an interesting issue that's been around in the public domain, certainly for a decade, and that's the idea of basic income, where you're guaranteed some kind of an income while you're in transition between work. Not just unemployment, but displacement, like I'm talking about, caused by AI and automation. And there are other impacts where levers of social control are not obvious, and that's this don't know what we don't know issue. As well, it's becoming a moving target, and it's going to be very difficult to corral. It's just going like from large language models to AI agents. That's happened in a commercial sense in less than 24 months, and that's a huge step forward, just going to AI agents versus what was working with before. And the pace of development and uses of AI are already exceeding the speed at which legislation can be developed and enacted. And that's even at the national level, let alone international cooperation. I mean, so there's a huge gap right now between guardrails and global sense of governance of AI, like we already have with nuclear weapons, or various other types of treaties dealing with toxic substances and mass weapons of mass destruction. We're not there yet with AI at all. So I'll move on to the next one and talk a little bit more now about guardrails, regulation, and certification. As I've said, guardrails are voluntary. Regulation is basically law. And to have guardrails, you can develop those on your own. You can accept some government's advice or some guru's advice as to guardrails. When it comes to regulation, that requires a government to make a decision, to create rules, create laws, and to create enforcement, and to create penalties. And so that's a huge gap that has to be addressed. Is actively, of course, many people in the legal world are working on that. In fact, I'm in the AI committee I serve on in the United States. There's about 35 members on this committee, and I'd say at least a third of them are PhD level engineers and PhD level lawyers, doctors of law. So they're very important people in this committee, because we deal with the draft legislation that is coming from Congress and the White House. So having people with those two skills in the same head is quite good. And adhering to regulations should promote integrity and ethical behavior by ensuring that AI systems meet specific standards. And again, the sense of buying in, getting public buy-in is critically important. And of course, governments are taking notice about this need for regulation and are doing. There's an initiative that Canada has played a role in with France on related to AI and ethics, ethical use of AI, explainable AI. There's the Hiroshima Accord that was the G20. I believe it was G20, it was G7, if not G20. I'm pretty sure it was G20, Hiroshima, about a year and a half ago, which again is a national level kind of collaboration on development of policy. The OECD in Paris has an AI observatory, which is an in-word for kind of think tank that collects information. And that also does a lot of policy coordination across the 34 members of the OECD. And finally, on the topic of guardrails and regulations, I want to point out at the very bottom that there's no silver bullet to prevent AI models from becoming unstoppable runaway trains. And I would say, however, a combination of volunteer guardrails and enforceable legislation would be a start. So that's where we are today. In fact, it's at this very beginning that we're at a start. We've got some guardrails, and we've got our first tranche of enforceable, I call it enforceable regulation, but it doesn't come into effect for 24 months. So it's still time to think about how this is going to evolve.
Good luck.
And so where is it all going? I'm almost finished here. Well, disruption is the key, is what's happening. And education has been forced into a crisis, as I'm sure you're aware or can conjure by the fact that you can use ChatGPT or these chatbots in the way I described earlier. And the key concern, as I've kept saying here, is the dark side. I'm very positive about the white side, or the bright side. But if we don't get this dark side constrained, it could be like the Wild West. There's no cops, there's no rules, everybody has their own guns. And there's a balancing act between taking advantage of the benefits while weighing the risks. And the EU Act is, in fact, a risk-based act. So there's 3 levels in that, and it's very simple right now. There's a sort of extreme risk, a serious risk, and no risk. I would suggest that that's kind of a too broad an approach right at the moment, but at least it's a step in the right direction of first measuring things based on the risk level, but also I would argue that needs to be based on the use level as well. So in conclusion, if AI systems are developed and deployed with integrity and ethics as a priority, society will benefit. Ethically designed AI can empower individuals, and it can, with greater control over their personal data, and foster transparency in decision-making processes. Emphasizing integrity and ethics in AI fosters trust, reduces risks, and paves the way for the responsible and sustainable integration of AI into various aspects of society. And without adhering to GAI systems built with integrity, ethics, guardrails, and a coming range of national and international regulations, then society will become the biggest loser. And if the results will be the results will be unpredictable and could even lead to the demise of society as we know it. And I think it's particularly will affect democracies more than any other form of governance. And the reason is democracies have far more choice at the level of the citizen, as we've seen in the way social media segmented our society. 25 years ago, we didn't have that kind of thing. Maybe it was nascent in the op-eds that people could write to a newspaper, but then they had language constraints on what they could say. Nowadays, it's wide open. And as I was saying, that these social media companies have cut back extensively on their ethics people. So a lot more spicy news, as in newsy stuff, is being circulated on the web without any reference to its authenticity. So by prioritizing integrity, ethics, and rules of the game in AI deployment and associated decision-making, society can harness the potential of AI while upholding social standards that can support a fair and just society. And here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 recent op-eds since June. No, that was the latest, since October last fall on AI that I've written with Ellie Fahey. Ellie is the CEO of MindBridge Analytics, an Ottawa-based AI company that deals in financial fraud detection at the institutional level specifically. Their largest client is the Bank of England, KPMG, the global auditors. They have 3,000 of their auditors around the world using their software tool to help detect fraud. And this is interesting because typically auditors, believe it or not, are supposed to detect fraud as kind of their fundamental public view is what they do. But in fact, they rarely discover fraud. They just check the books, so to speak. And so the books are manipulated, they don't necessarily detect that. So the fact that the auditors are recognizing that AI is going to either throw them out of business or they got to embrace it, I think is rather an interesting development. And I think we'll see that in a lot of professions, especially more specialized activities. And so thank you very much. Here are my affiliations related to AI and my email address that I concentrate everything on. I might mention, for those who are not familiar, the board, the Partnership Group for Science and Engineering, it's based in Ottawa. Its purpose is or its remit, in fact, is to assist all members of Parliament in any issues they might have in understanding science and engineering. And so our focus is the parliamentary precinct, and I'm on the board of directors of this organization. One of the things that this board, this organization sponsors in association with the Speaker of the House and the Speaker of the Senate is the Bacon and Eggheads Breakfast Club, which some of you may have heard of. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to a discussion.